how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another podcast episode of Speaking the Bare Truth. As you know, my name is Jayden, and right next to me, I have my partner in crime, Nik. How you doing today?
I'm good. How you going, Jayden?
Very good, thank you. It's another day, another podcast that we're going to be filming.
Excellent.
Recording. Yep, sorry, there's no video. You're just hearing our voices. That's, as I said to Nik before, it's so weird not filming in front of a camera because you know where you're looking at, but now we just have a little mic in front of us and that's pretty much that's all we're looking at. And I want to first of all just take the time to thank everyone who has been supporting this series. I've been I don't know about you, Nik, but I've been getting so many big responses to the artwork for our official channel.
Yes, I have had some good feedback.
That was such a really funny concept, that I approached Nik about it. I was just like, oh yeah, I had this idea, and I thought, let's give it a try, and I asked you, and you're just like, yeah, let's do it.
I think it's a brilliant idea, and I like how we're not taking ourselves too seriously, which is awesome. And and I love the symbolic aspect of speaking the bare truth, and you're literally as a life model represented in a kind of that image. It's a good image.
So I thought why not? It was just something different. I thought it was, as I said, there's such a. It was kind of like that double entendre. So it was kind of like the, obviously speaking the bare truth when we are just speaking how we feel and all that sort of thing. But then also it was like, well, so, and as I think even you said, as you were the drawer at one of my life modeling sessions, I thought that was such an interesting symbolic meaning.
That's how we met in the first place. So yeah.
Exactly. So I thought that was such a really interesting, symbolism in that, so I thought that was really cool. So thank you everyone to actually really supported that and just supporting our episode so far. I hope you've been enjoying this journey so far. It's been pretty cool. We have some really we were talking just before, and we have some really amazing episodes that are going to be coming up in the future. You'll have to wait and see. We're not going to give anything away. We've just got some really cool things in the works, so I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I guess, now to introduce today's topic, I think this was something that I think I mentioned. I mentioned this to you. Yeah. So the topic, I'm still trying to figure out what the topic will be called, but we're going to be talking about artists who really took and dived deep into self-portraiture, but also, dealt with kind of the whole thing about identity and how artists portrayed themselves in portraiture, because it's such a huge thing that there were so many artists who have created self-portraitures, but then there's always been, for me, I know that there have been so many artists who have created portraitures that have stood out, and they have gone the distance to create portraitures where you just look at going, oh man, this looks really interesting. And I think I'll ask you this as as a first question, Nik, because I was having I had this conversation with my mum, realizing that me and her share this in common. But I'll ask you this: when you were growing up, did you ever have a time where when you were young, you kind of imagined you were someone completely different, you were a different character?
Definitely. I remember one of my earliest memories was being really self-aware. So at 5 years old, thinking there's a little version of me inside my head sitting with a big book and thinking and looking through my thoughts. And that's how I was sort of understanding it. But also that thought of seeing someone else and going, I'm in my skin and they're in their skin. I wonder what it feels like to be them. Having these disassociations that people do experience, where sometimes, when you catch yourself thinking, oh, that's right, I'm in my own skin walking around having these thoughts, but it's strange being me and I can't explain it. And I wonder what it's like to be that other person. I've definitely had those thoughts. And I think I would say most people have had those thoughts at different times in their lives. I think it's
absolutely.
It's about, I think the notion of identity is such a really interesting journey that everyone goes on in their lifetime.
Yeah.
And in different ways. And the people that we're going to talk about today, the artists that have gone through such a struggle it's been, and I think we were discussing this earlier. I think if artists were not tortured souls, if artists weren't sensitive about who they are and the world that they live in, the art that they produce, we probably wouldn't even be talking about it today, perhaps. It sets them aside, it pulls them into this kind of realm of people that are thinkers and philosophers about life, that otherwise, that people that don't go through life having those thoughts probably wouldn't produce this kind of art, is what it's hard to kind of express, but I think, we'll have examples to talk about.
Yeah, and I think it's also like, as you said, like, they wouldn't have strong portraitures that would create raw emotion. Like, we were talking, like, one of the examples we'll talk about, which I'm not going to mention that example yet, but we were talking about it and we're just like, man, it actually seems like there's a lot of a torturous feeling, where it looks like the artist is portraying a lot of like pain and torture in his
mental or physical pain.
And so like there's like those artworks that really stand out, and you go, oh man, this person was really struggling, and that is something that people even read to today's time. Like, you have like people like Van Gogh who would actually create through line work, and his line work would represent how he would feel. And then there was like other people who would do similar things where they would paint, and the way that they paint would portray the mood that they were in. And it's like, I think, as you said, they're the ones that stand out because they're the ones that unfortunately had a lot of troubles in their own psyche.
Exactly. And I think it, as a viewer or a lover of art, we respond to that because we also, it's part of being human is that we go through pain, we experience loss, we grieve. Being alive can be a painful experience because like even watching the news can be, just seeing so many people in pain and at the moment countries are really struggling with the pandemic. It's hard for anyone that has any kind of sensitivity to watch other people in that kind of mass amount of pain, that mass amount of loss. And I think the artists that we're talking about are the types of people that they're very sensitive to other people's pain, but they also experience their own pain, and they depict that in their art, which is such I think a lot of people can relate to pain in some degree, or mental health issues, or struggling through life in different ways.
That's it. And there are just so many big examples of that, like where artists would portray that side of their hurt and their struggles as being human, because being human can be very painful.
It really can. I don't understand, when we talk about mental health, I always find it strange when you talk to someone that says, I don't understand what that other person's going through, because I think to be human, you should be able to, at some point, put yourself in someone else's situation and try and understand what it might be like to go...
be sympathetic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I know that not everyone experiences, depression or anxiety.
The same way, yeah.
But honestly, I think at some point, the statistics are pretty clear that most people have experienced depression at some point in their life. So surely you can draw on that to understand what other people are feeling. That's in my opinion, but not everyone really takes the time to think what other people are going through.
Absolutely. And it's like, I think we definitely need to be more sympathetic to each other and just realize that at the end of the day we all deal with things differently,
Exactly.
And I think it's but then if we try and separate ourselves, like we try and go, oh well, if you shouldn't be feeling like this or you shouldn't be feeling like that, it's like, well then you start separating, and then it makes it just not as helpful, and it makes it worse. And it's like, I think it's just about being able to, and I think that's why a lot of some artists that like create these portraits of emotion, they do it because they want it to speak to us. And I know that some of these artists that I've talked that I've been able to research and all that sort of thing, and even like some photographers and artists who I've interviewed on the channel, where their work really speaks to me because there's a lot of like raw emotion, and it just really spoke to me. And it's like, I think that is the things that connects us, being able to talk and speak about it, you know.
Art is a universal language.
I think. Absolutely.
And I think a lot of artists that do portray their pain through their art, I think it's a way of communicating beyond words.
Absolutely. And
should we talk about one of those artists?
I was gonna say. So how
I'm so excited.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say. So how are we gonna? Because I decide on who goes.
Who should we talk about first? Who would you like to talk about first?
I guess like gosh, I was just like I thought I was gonna say something, but I can't. I guess I can start. You know, like I'll give it a start. So I guess for me because this artist for me really influenced the way that I saw art. And for me, when I was thinking about artists who had that identity crisis where he didn't realize who he was looking at, or let's say things. So like obviously, so for me, one of the artists I want to talk about is the one and only Salvador Dali. So as for people who don't know, if you don't recognize the guy with the quirky little mustache pointing out.
The best mustache.
Yeah, like literally
in
the best.
History.
Oh, pretty much. Like one of the best ones in all of history to go through. And I think no one wore it better. I don't think, like, I've seen, I had a mate who, I think tried to do it himself, and I'm like, it's all right. Like, it's no Salvador, like, no Salvador. And, but, like, the more that I actually researched and read about him and like creating all these beautiful artworks like The Persistence of Memory, I think it was called Explosion, which is the clocks that are obviously exploding and all that sort of thing, the more I realized he actually had such a dark history through his work. And like I've written some notes right here. So so he was the I think it was like the second child to be born. Unfortunately, his brother had passed away, and then when Dali was born, he was actually named after his dead brother because his parents believed that he was the reincarnation of his dead brother. So they named him after that, and when he was a child, he believed that he was the mirror replacement of his brother.
So it created almost like an identity crisis for him.
And then he was even taken to his brother's grave, where he would, and like I was reading this and I'm like, oh gosh, imagine this happening. Like he would be taken to his brother's grave where he would see Salvador Dali, because that was literally...
Yeah, so you'd actually sing your own grave almost.
Yeah, it would be
your
such
brother.
a weird experience. And it's like, imagine seeing that as a kid going like, gosh, and like...
It's almost morbid because almost how does he grieve the loss of his brother who has his same name that he's kind of in a way replaced for his parents?
Yeah. And
that is a really interesting.
Yeah.
I have read about that because I think we were talking about, I've seen many Dali exhibitions, and that has always been discussed in the a lot of the texts that in the exhibition. So
it has, it would be. And and I came across this quote which was really interesting, where he was asked about the way his parents dealt with this with him, and he was like, he just said, "I wish to prove myself that I am not the dead brother but a living child." And I'm just like,
wow,
gosh, like it's because it was kind of like the way that I was reading it, it just seemed like his parents were trying to give him an identity of someone who was dead. When he was like, as he said, I'm a living person.
That's
like
right. I'm my own person too. To be named after him as well, his dead brother. Like how do you form your own identity?
Exactly. And I think for when we were like reading through and looking through so many of his artworks, we like, as I said before, like when we were talking about like some artwork portrays a lot of pain and tortured and disfigured men and all that sort of thing. He portrayed a lot of that in his work, and
like women and men are kind of twisted and almost
the human struggle. And it was like you could see a lot of that in his work. And like the one work that did relate to his brother was the portrait of my dead brother, which was a powerful image, and it was just like, it was a pointillized image of a face in the sky. And I think I remember reading somewhere there was the top of it is a bird, and it was a representation.
That's interesting. You can see the shape. So I hope we'll hopefully include this image in the podcast because it's a really fascinating image.
It is really interesting, and like for me, like when I looked at it, it kind of reminded me of the pain of him looking at a reflection, like because he would say that he would look at his reflection, and because he was like had this thing of like, am I actually me or am I someone else that my parents want me to be? And and it's like I felt really like when I was reading through it, like, and I've studied his work for a long time, and I've been a huge admirer of his work, but when I started looking into him, it was like I felt for him. Like I felt really bad for him, because like imagine just being told that you were someone else as a young boy, and then being taken to your grave, brother's grave, and seeing your name there when you're
parents,
actually...
And what were your parents trying to teach? It wasn't like... It wasn't to go there and mourn the loss of the brother. It's almost like, what are they trying to tell you by taking you there and seeing your own name on the grave? That would be pretty... Yeah.
And I think that's such an interesting, like I said, that quote of, but a living child, like I want to be... I'm not dead. I'm alive,
And he lived, like, as someone, in his life, he lived big. And the way his persona, like, like you were talking about his amazing moustache.
Yeah, exactly.
He had a big personality. So maybe he was trying to compensate for the, like, how do you form your, like, I wonder if that didn't happen to him, if he would have turned into a different person and a different artist.
You wonder that, don't you?
He's a really fascinating example. And I love how you've selected Portrait of My Dead Brother to discuss like the idea of self-portrait or identity, because this painting is really interesting. There's like a background, and it looks like there's these kind of figures that look like almost alien-like, kind of strange, like they're almost like faceless figures. And then there's people in the distance, and I don't know exactly what's going on. There's like two people, and it's almost like a struggle. Like, I don't know if that's symbolic. There's one person alone, and then there's two people. Oh, yeah. And then there's two people again. Like, is that him? Is that Salvador kind of symbolizing himself? Like, there was his brother, and then Salvador, the Salvador we know, existed. And then, there's a constant battle between the two. I could be reading a lot into this. Who knows what...
It's your interpretation of it,
this is the way I'm seeing it. And I do think I have seen this before. It's not probably one of his most famous works, but he was a prolific artist over many years, and time. He is one of the greatest artists that has ever lived.
In the 19th century, the 1900s,
in the 20th century, definitely. Because I don't know when he was born, but this painting that we're talking about is from 1963. Yeah. So interesting. It's a fascinating painting.
It is, and it's like it's really interesting how, like, I think we'll talk about it. It's like the pointillized, the pointillism aspect, and it kind of reminds me of like. Well, I think you said this. You mentioned the whole idea of a photograph.
Yeah, like when pixelated look.
And he created like a pixelated image.
Like it's dots on the surface over the background, which looks like a close-up of a very pixelated image, a photograph. So he might have had... Maybe they only had one or few photographs of his brother. But and what's really weird, when you look at it really closely, it looks like little people, lots and lots of people in the nose, but I don't know if he meant to do that.
I can kind of see that.
There's a lot of in surrealism. Surrealism is really fascinating because there's a lot of symbolism obviously in surrealist art, and there's like fantasy elements, like where it might not be portraying what we think is real. It could be portraying like things from our imagination or what we're feeling in this case. Really, I think Salvador Dali is a really interesting figure. Like a lot of his art is really interesting too, because he portrays a lot of phallic kind of imagery in his art, and he's very sensual in the way he portrays the body. And I think he explored things that probably a lot of people are afraid to explore, but he did that through his painting, which I am forever grateful that he did, because, imagine a world without Salvador Dali.
Oh, gosh, no, like, I mean, he was like one of the I guess in a way, the forefathers of surrealism.
Yeah,
and it's
he's one of the greatest painters of that movement.
He is, and it's like, I think one of the other ones that, just thinking about like reincarnation, all that sort of thing. There was that artwork that was, I cannot remember the name of it, but it's the about the man that looks like he's breaking out of an egg, and his arms like just stretched out.
This is another Salvador Dali work. Yeah. Because he seems to portray eggs a lot in his work. Yeah,
and it makes me wonder because, like, like for me, this is like when I look at it, I kind of think of
birth.
Yeah, the rebirth.
Or rebirth,
and because he struggled with that, looking at himself in the mirror and seeing someone completely different when he was told that, or when his parents felt like he was the reincarnation of his dead brother, and it's like,
They were obviously traumatized from losing him, but they've unfortunately passed on that trauma to their son, to Salvador, the Salvador we know.
Yeah.
By their loss and grief. Yeah, I feel so terribly for him, because that must have been a really difficult childhood, because his parents were grieving, and like they would have been really sad beyond measure. And then trying to bring this new. Salvador was this amazing, talented artist. Perhaps I wonder if he would have become an artist if he hadn't gone through those struggles.
Yeah, you kind of wonder about that. And like, as you said, like, with artists, some of the most famous artists have had some very traumatic experiences, and that's what they portray through their art. And I think, Dali's definitely, I think for me, Dali was definitely one of the many artists that I wanted to mention today. And
he's a very special person to talk about.
Absolutely. And so would you like to take the stand for one of your
that I would like to talk about?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, I think talking about, because we talked about Salvador Dali first, I think it'd be interesting now, and someone that we're both going to discuss is Frida Kahlo.
Oh,
because we've talked about this.
Yeah.
So Frida Kahlo was considered a surrealist artist, but she was called that, but she didn't consider herself a surrealist artist, because she said she was portraying her own reality in her paintings. And because we're talking about self-portraiture, she's probably one of the most famous artists that continuously use self-portrait in her work.
Yeah.
She's really interesting. She sort of, when she was a teenager, she was in that really terrible bus accident that disfigured her, and really horrific, in 1925. And that actually, she wasn't an artist before that, but apparently she became an artist 3 months later. She began to paint. But I think let's talk about the work that you were going to talk about, because I have another work that I'd like to talk about.
Sure.
But like, what was the work that you wanted to talk about?
But yeah, like I think one of the things that I wrote down as well, because I had because like when I was researching Kahlo as well, I researched about her accident, all that sort of thing, to get an idea of like that trauma that she went through, and I actually wrote down the injuries that she sustained and all that. Like, and I think I'll share this part that I wrote down. So I guess for people who don't know about she was in it was a bus crash, like
that's right,
bus crashed in, and so Kahlo was impaled by an iron handrail that went straight through her pelvis, and after being I think it was her like a few of the other people on the bus and all had to pull it out, like it was like pretty full on. And so when her injuries was a fractured pelvic bone, abdomen and uterus was punctured, spine broken in 3 places, right leg broken in 11 places, right foot crushed and dislocated, collarbone was broken, and shoulder was dislocated. And it's like, well, when I was reading that, and I think you even said this as well, like how
did she survive?
Yeah, like that is just
how can a human survive something as traumatic as that?
Like I heard the story once, like my my mum's brother broke both of his arms, and I'm just like, wow, which seems very minor compared to this.
This is the kind of trauma that you think, and I think I've read, I don't know if she was 15 or 18, because it's weird, because I've seen different people have said she was
Different.
15 and 18.
Yeah.
But anyway, she was a teenager when that happened.
Yeah, she wasn't that old.
Yeah, like that would have, because she was growing at the time. So imagine how that would have changed her growth and a time, and also a time when you're forming your identity as a human as well. Like to be in such a traumatic experience, it actually fed the rest of her, the fact that she became a painter 3 months after experiencing that accident, and that was her way of sort of maybe expressing her pain, her trauma through paint. It says, like, there's a quote, there's many quotes that Frida's amazing. Her quotes are amazing, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I find her really fascinating. She said, "I paint self-portraits because I am so often alone, because I am the person I know best." Because she was so disfigured, she would have spent a lot of time
by herself,
in bed, different times when her mobility was so poor that she was stuck alone, and that I guess she was alone with her canvas and her paint, and that was her way of expressing her trauma.
Yeah, and I think I remember reading somewhere that the only thing she had near her bed was a mirror, so that was obviously the only person she saw was herself, and that's why she did a lot of portraiture. And so the artwork I was going to mention was called The Broken Column, which was painted in 1944, which was a portrait of her in a backstrap, so one of those straps.
Like almost like a corset, but not.
Like it was a cement corset, and and that was pretty much. I read about it saying that it was a portrait created after her surgery to correct the ongoing problems that she had through.
Because she had spinal.
Yeah, she had spinal. It was spine broken in 3 places.
Oh,
so like she had to.
It's remarkable that she even survived that, let alone.
Yeah, and it's like, and so that was such a interesting example of her trauma of portraying that, her struggle. And it was just, I think, it's just pretty much the portrait of her just sitting with this, it looks like such an uncomfortable back brace going across her chest, going down, I think it was like her breast, and like all around. It was just, it's such a big portrayal of like just the trauma that she had to deal with and just the recovery stages. And, the second one that I was going to say as well was Without Hope, which was...
Even the title says a lot.
I know, it says quite a lot. And it's like... And that was made, 1 year after that artwork, so 1945, which...
so this is like, at this stage, she had the accident in 25, so this is like 20 years after the accident.
Yeah. And
so she was having to deal,
still deal with that,
like the rest of her life, I guess.
Pretty much. And it's like, this artwork was her in bed, and there was this funnel sticking out of her mouth, and it's just like, through the funnel there was all these different, like, I think it was like body parts and all that sort of thing it's like it was getting forced down the funnel.
Oh, right.
And
interesting.
so
because she lost a lot of, there would have been a lot of loss in terms of her body.
Absolutely. And it was like, and I wrote down, it was a representation of how she felt going through lifelong pain and countless operations. Because imagine, like, I couldn't find the exact amount of operations she went through, but she would have, reading about all those injuries, she would have had to do a lot.
Oh, God, yeah. Every surgery would have been its own kind of trauma around it, because the recovery from that kind of surgery... And I think I read, now, I hope, because over time I've read lots of different bits of pieces about her, but I read something a long time ago that the clothing that she wore, I think she had special clothes made to help her, to kind of keep her standing upright. She also, let's talk about the way her image as a person, because she's such an interesting to look at person. Like, her face is so interesting, the way she portrayed, like, it's kind of famous, the idea of her monobrow, which was really part of her identity, I think, and the way she portrayed herself. It's like Dali's, his amazing moustache. And I think it makes them such unique people that you want to look at them. Like, they're fascinating people to look at. I think Frida, like, has been photographed a lot. Her father photographed her a lot, and she's, so her life has been documented from a young age. So that's, in that way, we know quite a lot about her. I find her really fascinating. There's a painting that I want to talk about, if that's okay.
Go for it.
It's called What the Water Gave Me. It's by Frida. It's a self-portrait by Frida in 1938, oil on canvas. And it's a really strange one that is probably not as well known as many of her other portraits.
It is like, because I think I had come across it once, and it is a very interesting painting to look at. But, you know, it's kind of one of those ones where it's like, ooh, how do I feel like when I'm looking at this? It's like, it's such an interesting, but do you want to explain?
I'll explain a bit more.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to insert like the images into the video just so you can see this for yourself as well. But just to describe it, it's an image of Frida in the bath, and the painting is like from her perspective of looking down on her legs, and you can see one of her feet is really mutilated, like from the accident.
Yeah, crushed.
It's crushed. It's blood and cut. It looked like it was terribly cut.
Yeah.
And then in the bath, all this symbolic imagery, which, to be honest, I don't know what all the symbolism means, because a lot of surrealist art has a lot of symbolism. You have to read a lot into it. And it could be, you know, very personal things that she was... But there are things that you can see. Like there's a really strange one, which is symbol in the painting, which could be phallic, maybe not, is a volcano with a looks like a skyscraper coming out of the volcano, or I don't know if it is meant to be a skyscraper.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's open for your interpretation, and maybe what Frida was trying to say as well. But why it's an interesting painting for me as a self-portrait is because you don't really see her face in it, except there is an image of a woman that looks like she's got ropes tied to her neck and her legs, and she's been pulled from one part of this watery kind of environment to the other. I think that is meant to be Frida, but you don't see her famous face. Like a lot of her self-portraits is usually, it can be her whole figure, but it's usually really focused. The focal point is her face, I think, often. But there is often, you know, around her torso, because that's where a lot of the trauma happened as well. But yeah, I find, you know, this is a really interesting painting because self-portraiture can also be, it doesn't necessarily have to be an exact representation of you. It can be symbolic of who you think you are. And there's been, if you go through the history of art, there's some really interesting portraits where, especially portraits of artists, where there's like tools of the trade in the, you know, it could be, and we'll be talking about this soon, but artists often will depict their hand, for example, or themselves in a reflection, or themselves within a world, like we're going to talk about Escher. There's some really interesting self-portraits Escher did where you can see he's portraying his hand. So you can see his hand, which is the hands that make these amazing artworks, is, you know, so that's his tool, his hand. And then he's holding a sphere and he's looking at his reflection, and then you can see he portrays everything within that sphere as if a reflection of where he is, which could be a study. He's sort of sitting in this space, but even to the extent where you can see what's outside the window, the furnishings, like it's even getting a bit warped in the edges of the sphere. I find that really fascinating. Thinking about other artists that do this, like someone that I really have admired for a long time is Brett Whiteley, and he's an Australian artist for those that don't know his work. One of his works it's the Self-Portrait in the Studio from 1976. He won the Archibald Prize that year, which, you know, it's pretty amazing. And this painting is now held at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. So if you're ever there and are lucky enough to see it in the flesh,
please let us know in the comments if you're in Sydney and listening to that.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, go and visit his studio in Surrey Hills, because it's been the Art Gallery of New South Wales owns his studio, and you can actually visit his studio, and there's some of his work on display there as well.
Wow.
So it's a special place to visit. So basically the painting, it depicts Brett Whiteley in his studio in Surrey Hills, and there's a nude on the left of him. He's sort of painting himself reflected in a mirror, so he's holding a mirror, and that's the self-portrait there. And Whiteley uses this colour, which is this vibrant blue, and he calls it the ecstasy-like effect of ultramarine blue. That's what he calls it.
It's an interesting way of describing it.
That's it. Yeah, the blue is really, it just is like across the whole painting. It's really lush. It's the most gorgeous blue. It's like the blue of the ocean, but not. It's a really special blue. What's really interesting, his wife, Wendy Whiteley, said about this portrait, she said, the self-portrait, he was warning himself and other people watching. It was the cage of his interior, his addiction, the window or a glimpse of possible escape into paradise, the escape from one's psyche. So sadly, it famously and sadly, Brett Whiteley died of a heroin overdose and was gone too soon. But the painting's really interesting, I think, because it depicts his studio, including some of his work, like his sculptures and his other, drawings are in the space. I think it's Wendy the nude, but you can't see her face, so I'm not sure if it's Wendy or not. And then outside the window is a depiction of the Sydney Harbour, which I'm pretty sure you couldn't see from his studio window, but he's depicting, it's almost like he's situating himself in Sydney by showing that, this is the place. I find that Brett Whiteley has done several self-portraits over his career. It's not something he's known for per se, he's a really amazing artist for lots of reasons. But I find this painting really spoke to me, and even when I was in high school, I actually created a homage to it. I did a screen print and
that's cool.
Yeah, I really loved it, and I spent a lot of time looking at it and studying every line and every curve on the nude figure, and then looking at the self-portrait, because I think there's even hair on the canvas, so I don't know if it's his own hair, but he often would use other kind of collage elements in his work as well, in his paintings. He would do oil paintings, but include other elements like feathers and hair and other things. But yeah, if you haven't seen Brett Whiteley's work, I really recommend visiting his work, either going to the gallery or just looking him up and finding out a bit more about him, because he's a really important part of art history in Australia.
I think it's when because you have a picture of the artwork in your house, and the first time I looked at it, it was a very fascinating depiction of how, I think when I looked at it, it was kind of like, for me, it made me think about the artist's interpretation of what they see in their own studio, because it's like what when artists do a self-portrait or a portrait of themselves, self-portrait, I pretty much just said that was a double negative right there. But when they do that, it's kind of like their interpretation of what they see when they look at themselves. And and it's such a interesting way, because when people go, oh, this is what I see when I look at this person, but then when the other person, when themselves look at themselves, they see something different.
It's like seeing yourself in a photograph and you're like, is that how I look? Because I don't feel like that's how I look.
Exactly. And it's such for me, it was such an interesting interpretation, like the color that he used to the very vibrant color. I love how he calls it ecstasy-like effect of ultramarine blue. That's just amazing. I've never heard that term before,
that's his own. I think that's his own making.
Good on him for creating his own
his own blue.
Yeah, exactly. This
is my blue. This is how I. You get it from the paint shop. This is I want the ecstasy-like effect of ultramarine blue. Thank you.
And the people at the counter just going, what?
Huh?
And
I wonder if he mixed his blue. I wonder if it was out of a tube, or did he have to mix that blue to make it?
I feel like he would have to,
because it's such an interesting blue, isn't it? It's really deep.
Is.
It's almost purple and dark purple blue. Yeah, it's got a lot of facets to it. Yeah,
it is a very interesting blue, definitely. And as I said, I don't think he went into a store asking that specific. That would have been funny to see that, but
definitely.
I think he would have probably, by the looks of it, had to do a lot of color mixing to
he would have created
get that.
His own. I would say it would be his own kind of signature blue that he would create. And I just used quotation marks and realized no one can see the quotation marks.
Yes,
it's hard not to talk with your hands, but just
we're very emotive people.
We're very chatty. Like my face is doing things. I'm very
But I think in a way that's cool that he created his own color, because in a way that helps bring out his portrait, because it's his own creation in a way, and it's his own interpretation of how he sees what he sees around him. So in a way, I think that actually brings out the portrait even more.
You can think about, because I think self-portrait has a lot of symbolism.
Yeah.
And maybe blue had a symbolic meaning for him.
Exactly.
It could be the Sydney Harbour blue that he was trying to capture, or was it blue, I think we've spoken about how blue has a lot of different emotional connections between...
It does, yeah.
It could be sadness, it could be calmness.
Yeah.
Some people think that blue can induce thought-provoking it's a thought-provoking colour. It's actually the colour I selected to paint my room when I was in high school, because I thought I was spending a lot of time in my room thinking and studying and reading and being a massive geek and loving my art books.
Yeah, loving life and all that sort of thing.
and yeah, often my dad was like, get out of your room and do some, see people. But I was actually having a whole other world happening within my room, which actually kind of segues if we want to talk about someone else now, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Someone that another person I really admire, her name's Tracey Moffatt. Tracey Moffatt. She's from Brisbane, and she talked about, there was a quote that she was sort of saying that, she has such an imagination, like the thoughts that are going through her head, people would be amazed. Like she could sit still and have these incredible imaginative thoughts. And I think that's what a lot of artists have, which probably sets them apart from other people that are not artists, maybe. I don't know. But there's a portrait she did. She did a self-portrait in 1999, which is actually held at the National Library of Australia. But it's actually an edition, because it's a photograph. You can actually purchase her work. Wow. You can actually buy this piece. I wonder how much. I'd love to buy it.
It probably would be a lot of money.
It would be a lot. I saw the gallery that's selling the work, and it said, do you want to make an inquiry? And I was thinking, I should make it.
I'm tempted. I'm very tempted.
Should I make an inquiry? But maybe it's a bit out of my price range.
Yeah, it's like, I don't think my wallet would like me after. But, thank you for asking.
Here's my home deposit. There you go. But there's this portrait that Tracey Moffatt did in 1999. And it's a black and white photograph that she hand-coloured. And what's really interesting about it is that it's... so Moffatt has photographed herself with the camera. She's holding a camera and she's looking into the distance, and there is an element, because it's hand painted or hand coloured, it kind of reminds you of the older photographs that were taken in black and white that were hand coloured from the past. But also there's an element where I think Tracey Moffatt was interested in portraying herself like wearing almost sort of looks like a 1950s look that she's in the clothes that she's wearing. But I think the reason I want to sort of talk about this, it's sort of interesting. Again, it's about the photographer with her the tools of her trade, which is her camera. And then she would have set up another camera to take the photograph. Which she was very much posed, like she's posed herself in a way. It wasn't like a snap or something, which we'll talk about snaps in a minute when we talk about Andy Warhol, I think.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, Tracey Moffatt's really interesting, and if you don't know her work, please go and check her work out, because she's an incredible... Her work, her body of work is really fascinating. She's also made a film called Bedevil, which I highly recommend. I think you can check it out on SBS. It might be there still to watch, because she's a gifted filmmaker, photographer. Video kind of has permeated lots of her work, as well as photography. So she actually doesn't call herself a photographer. I think she says she's an image maker. So she likes to, and that I find that really interesting as well. But,
interesting, yeah.
Yeah, but I wonder if there's very few artists that I'm trying to think of an example who hasn't included. There probably is many examples, maybe I'm being exaggerating, but that hasn't tried to even considered self-portraiture at some point or even once. Because I think if you're a creative person, you're a subject that you're always there. Like you're always available.
You're always around, yeah.
To make that, if you needed a muse, like, or someone else and they weren't available, but you're there, so I can be my own muse, I guess, in my own work. Or I think it's also forming an identity as an artist, because identity and our personas, who we think we are, is portrayed. Often you'll see artists will either do a self-portrait, and then they're often artists are often friends with other artists. That's not unusual, and their friends will often do portraitures of each other. Like they'll portray themselves in different ways, and I think it's natural for us to want to kind of explore what it means to be myself and how I'm portraying myself to others. Like you said before, it's really, in a painting, how do you portray what's going on in your head?
Oh, yeah.
You do that by using, and we were talking about Salvador Dali and Frida Kahlo did that in a symbolic way. They would often have there would be other things in the image that can kind of point to that. So in Tracey Moffatt's case, she's used a camera to say, look, she's portraying herself as a photographer. Yeah. She's a photographer who's taken a photograph of herself, but then in black and white, then hand-coloured it, which is really interesting. Because a lot of her work, she has done black and white, but a lot of her work is colour photography or video, which is really interesting in itself. But anyway, that might segue into another topic, which is Andy Warhol. Go for it. Because, he kind of he used Polaroids a lot in his
he was a huge Polaroid person.
Massively. And which is really interesting.
The colour Polaroids, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's such an immediate way of, getting an image, like if you take a Polaroid. But then this is something I don't even know, you probably could tell me this, but if you're using a Polaroid to take a self-portrait, how do you do that with a Polaroid camera? Or do you set up the image and then you get... Because I don't know if they have the ability to do... You know what I mean? To even use a timer or like you know how often when you're doing... You would use like an extension cord in the old days of photography. I don't know. There's something to look... I didn't even think... I just thought of that question then.
I mean, I guess, we'll open that question to the viewers if you have an idea. Like, I haven't used a lot of Polaroids myself, but from what I can... Because I've looked at Polaroid cameras myself, and I think, I think some of the Polaroid cameras are made with a self-timer, so sometimes they put on a stand self-timer.
Must be, yeah.
Yeah, but...
because otherwise, because it's sort of a thing where cameras were made for families who were on holiday and they wanted to take a photo.
And just go...
Yeah, let's do a group photo, yeah.
Yeah, but, I think, I don't know a lot about Polaroid because I haven't personally used that myself in my own practice, but I think it's always been something I've been interested in. I just haven't got around to it, but I have heard, and I've also seen that some Polaroid cameras do have self-timers, so I think...
It is possible.
Yeah, it is. I think it is possible.
Sense. Yeah. Because I think, it's really interesting because a lot of his work, the work that Andy Warhol is famous for, his screen prints in, but the images that are becoming more known, I think people are starting to sort of know him as well for his Polaroid photographs. And there's this series he did called Self-Portraits in Drag. Yeah. I had never actually heard of this series, but it's a very interesting look of his work. It is, because it's I think there was a whole series that he did, because he actually did a lot of self-portraits throughout. He's another person that's famous for self-portraits. He depicted himself in lots of different ways, but the images of himself in drag are really interesting. So he did a series in 1986, but I think he also did series earlier on in 1981 as well. So if you want to look that up, there are Centre Pompidou, which I've been to in Paris, which is amazing, has the work that I'm actually going to talk about now, which is Self-Portraits in Drag from 1988. Warhol is depicted wearing a kind of, it looks like a blue or grey type wig, like curly wig, and his face looks very white, like, I don't know if he's used white makeup or powder, and he looks like he's wearing red lipstick. And they're really interesting images, and they're iconic now because he's exploring gender identity. I think Andy Warhol is fascinating because... He is a very interesting artist, Yeah, I think in the past, a long time ago, I think I kind of dismissed his work when I was much younger. Okay. And that was just from my own, for whatever reasons, but in recent times, I have a huge amount of respect for him. I've always respected him. What I should say is I didn't necessarily, when I was really young, appreciate what he was doing with his work. Yeah. But I think I do now. I do understand what he was trying to do with his work. He's really interesting. There's a quote, "I paint pictures of myself to remind myself that I'm still around." Wow. Yeah. So that's deep. That's actually really deep. Like, that kind of reminds me of, well, like I said, the Dali quote going, like, trying to prove that
he's a living person, not a, you know, he's not dead. He's actually a living person. And it kind of reminds me of, hearing that reminds me of that quote kind of going like, you know, I kind of sometimes use myself to remind myself that I'm here right now on this world right now. And that's such an interesting quote.
When you think about it, it's about our own mortality, because I think creating an artwork is going to live beyond our years. Like we will pass away and over, you know. But these works, especially if the works are saved and, you know, saved in galleries and collections and exhibited and saved in lots of the art books that we are surrounded by right now. There's a lot of art books, but like he's really interesting. Apparently Andy Warhol took heaps of self-portraits between 1964 and when he passed away in 1987, between those dates. And there's a really interesting quote by Ted Mann on the Guggenheim's website. So he said, Warhol had a long-standing interest in drag queens and more broadly in artifice, role-playing and the construction of identity. In his numerous self-portraits, he was less interested in revealing himself than in representing a mask or presenting a mask, just as he carefully cultivated a superficial, depthless celebrity persona in life. I don't know, it's so hard to understand Andy Warhol because
there's so much to
I find
him.
It really difficult to understand it because was what he was doing, like the Factory that everyone or people that know anything about art probably have heard about the Factory, which was his studio where a lot of cool people hung out. Yep. And he took Polaroids of a lot of amazing, famous people.
Oh, he did.
Like, it's amazing. There's a book that's come out about it.
Yeah, and I've, like, read some of the stars that were part of his... Because he called it... What were they called? Like, the Andy Warhol superstars and all that.
And he called them his art workers, which is really interesting. Like, it was a factory. Like, he really considered art like a factory of people making things.
Yeah.
And not just one person making something. Yeah.
And, like, some of the guests that I read on there was, like, Paul McCartney, David Bowie.
Yeah, definitely. Arnie
Madonna.
Schwarzenegger.
Yeah. And, like,
Blondie,
there was...
all the famous people that were probably in New York at the time would go.
Yeah, I think John Lennon.
John Lennon, yes, and Yoko, I think.
Yeah, so there was amazing. A lot of
oh my God,
people.
Yeah. He was documenting it through a Polaroid. Like, he was just like... And I think it was often just one snap. It was like one image and he's captured them. He often wouldn't take... I don't know, maybe he did take more than one Polaroid. Who knows what he saved and what he didn't.
And there was actually another... interesting, because like the way that he captured things as well was quite interesting, and like I would read about like at the Factory, like sometimes there would be like orgies happening and all that sort. But he wouldn't be involved in it. He was famously
asexual, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
And I don't know if that for sure, but
yeah, he would be photographing it. Like he would just
really?
be going. I might be completely don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure like I read somewhere that he would be going around while people were intimate and just like photographing them.
And what did he do with those photographs? Because I don't know if it's been, maybe they didn't exhibit it because it was pornographic or something. Yeah,
like I don't know. As I said, don't quote me. I might be completely wrong, but I feel like I read that somewhere.
That's interesting. I wouldn't be surprised because he was
a very weird, unusual person.
Well, he was strange looking too, wasn't he? Because he had like a really... Like, he had, like, his face, was shallow on his cheeks. When you look at his cheeks...
He had a very distinctive look.
He did. He was very much distinct. It was almost a caricature of himself. Yeah. Which is interesting to think about. Because maybe he was walking around with a mask all the time. I don't know if this is right, but did he live at home with his mum... for most of his life? I don't know.
I don't know, actually.
I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if
I'm far back.
I need to check that out. And I remember a few years ago there was an exhibition at the NGV about his boxes. So he would archive boxes. So he would get anything that was sitting on the desk. He would just pile it into a box and then close and put a date and put it away. And there's literally a factory. There's now a museum, I think, of these. So he would keep, like, anything that was on there, like theatre stubs or...
I think
like,
I remember that.
Yeah, it's so fascinating.
Was that the exhibition at the NGV where it was, like, Warhol and there was that other artist?
I think this was... No, this was probably early 2000s.
Oh, okay.
But it was, it was a solo one, but I just found it really weird because it was such a weird, and I think he was a bit of a hoarder, so, fascinating. Like, it says a lot about him as a person, and the way he collected people, collected objects. It's almost like a commodity, like people were a commodity perhaps to him, but I don't know if there was more depth to him, like maybe there was more caring there. But who knows what kind of twisted reality was happening inside his brain. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's really difficult to know. But again, he's another fascinating character in the history of art.
But I think it's also what you were saying before. Like, I think you said something along the line of, like, it is such, like, when people were to think what actually goes on in an artist's brain. And it's like, it's kind of hard to actually say what goes on. Like, to be honest, like, when artists are portraying certain things in their artwork, and it's like, and when people are like, how did you think of that? And it's like, it's all up here, you know what I mean? It's like just
a fertile imagination.
Exactly. And it's like, it's just our way and an artist's way of interpreting the world around them. And, talking about these artists who would create these portraits of themselves, it's kind of like their way of going, this is the way that I see the world around me. This is how sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it's like shattered, like, the way that Dali portrayed the struggle and just the disfigurement and the kind of the torturous figures of like what he might have been feeling growing up as a kid and growing up and dealing with depression. Like, he had all this mental illness, and then he also suffered other illnesses like physical illness as well. And so, it's like their way of portraying how they would be feeling.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like another person we wanted to talk about, which is another famous self-portrait type artist, but not self-portrait, is Cindy Sherman. Really, how can we not talk about self-portraiture without talking about the original selfie person? But really, like, her work. Yeah, we have spoken about her before.
Loads of time, and I think we'll still talk about her in the future.
Talking about her because she's just a fascinating photographer. But it's that interesting notion of what is a self-portrait, because she's like Andy Warhol. There's a mask, so she's not portraying herself when she gets in a costume and a mask or makeup. It's always someone else, isn't it?
And it's kind of like when I was asking that first question when we were talking about, was there ever a time as a child that you pretend to be someone else? And it's kind of like she literally took it that way, going, I'm going to actually go out there and create these portraits of that are self-portraits, but they're not really self-portraits, because
I'm using myself as a subject or my muse, but I'm recreating myself through my work. And we've spoken that this all came out of her childhood love of the costume box that she had at home, and and playing and acting, and then she took that and has run with it for the rest of her life as an artist, which I find fascinating. And she was someone that was really interested in pop culture and film, and I think especially horror films for her. She would watch horror films and then kind of get inspiration from that, and then create these really kind of interesting, and also some of her
intense imagery,
really intense, especially the kind of the series that are kind of like her film stills, which are not film stills. I'm doing my inverted commas again, listeners, but she did these black and white series in the 1970s. Inverted commas.
I remember those really ones. They were beautiful,
amazing images, and
they're so intense as well.
Exactly, and her own imaginative. Like, these are not existing films; these are films that she's imagined. And then she did her kind of centerfold series, which was the color kind of series after that, which I think is probably my favorite series. It's just so amazing. And again, it's that image of someone like waiting for a phone call. It looks like a horror film scenario maybe, or like someone that looks like they've been something's happened to them before this photograph was taken. Like, they're lying on the ground. What happened to them? We don't know. She's a really amazing person in terms of kind of questioning and like staring at yourself, like you were saying about Dali, looking in the mirror and going, who is that person? I think she did that with her camera basically throughout her whole career. She's kind of, I wonder if what she's thinking is, could you lose yourself in that process from years of literally kind of reinventing yourself every time you get the camera out and look at can you get a bit of identity crisis or a bit of confusion about who am I as a person, or does she really know who she is and this is just her way of expressing herself through lots of different versions of herself?
Yeah, it's so funny because we're not just thinking about that. I don't know why my mind went to this specifically, but it went to Doctor Who.
Yeah.
You know, and it like it was, there was this one quote that really stood out to me in the series, and I'm like, it's such an interesting, like it's such an interesting quote, and it goes, I think it was the 11th Doctor, so Matt Smith pretty much said, you know, we all change when you think about it. We're all different people through our life, but that's okay. You got to keep moving as long as you remember the people who you used to be. And that really made me think about like, it's actually true, because, you know, throughout our whole life like, I know that for me, like, I was not the same person I was like 10 years ago when I was 16. Like, I wasn't the same when I was 10. I was always a different person, you know, and it's like, and
you evolve
honestly
as a human.
And probably in 10 years time, like, you know,
you'll be a different person again.
Exactly, you know, and so even 30 years in the future, 20 years, like, you know, I think it's
the core of who you are will still be there, but you can people recreate themselves over time too. Like, they can reinvent themselves. Like, you can, you know, kind of re-image yourself like really dramatically, or you could do it. It could happen slowly. Because I think you're right, like, your life experiences changes who we are. Like, I don't know anyone that's been so sure of who they are from, you know, birth to death that they haven't changed immensely through that life lived experience.
Yeah, even at least once. Like, I feel like it's I feel like it's something that, you know, and I think these artists that we've talked about, they've portrayed that change through their work and through their portraiture. You know, like, you have people like Frida Kahlo who would portray her pain and her struggles through her accident. Yeah, and then you would have, like, Dali, who was consistently dealing with an identity crisis, you know, and he would portray that struggle sometimes through his artwork. And I think it's something that
And Vincent's another person we haven't spoken about in depth.
Van Gogh, yes.
Vincent van Gogh.
Van Gogh.
Yes, the Goth.
What, yeah.
Yeah, he
Goth,
was like...
with the
beautiful... We were talking about it before, because because he's another person obviously famous for his self-portraits. And he's famous for that red beard, which is so iconic, like him. But then when you see him after he, you know, cut off his part of his ear, just awful. Obviously, he was going through a lot of mental health issues and turmoil. And it's interesting because I never thought about it until I looked at it. There's this, you know, there's the paintings that he did with the bandage around his head, but he looks clean shaven, and I didn't think about it until I'm like, well, it always looked weird looking at those self portraits, because I was like, not just the fact of the bandage around the head. I thought there's something wrong, and then I just realised it's because he doesn't have his beard.
I know.
The beard that is almost like attached to who we know as Vincent van Gogh is that ginger beard, those soulful eyes. If you look at his paintings, he's got it. He's obviously a very interesting... I would love to talk to him. Like, he would be a fascinating person to speak to.
He would have. And but yeah, no, I didn't actually. It was funny because the way that you said that you didn't realise that, I actually didn't put two and two together as well, and didn't realise that. You know, he, in the portraits of him with the bandaged ear, he never had a beard.
Yeah, it's weird. I wonder if the hospital did that. Like, if someone shaved his beard off because of
his injury.
I don't know.
Oh, because the way he's just like.
But they're like, okay, we're not going to let you near any razors now, so we're going to just clean shaven and no razors for you.
Yeah, it's like no more.
No more
because
razors
I don't want you to lose another ear.
Oh boy, no, please.
Gosh.
You know.
But it is interesting when you actually like look at the broader spectrum of self-portraits. Like, a lot of in a way, the greatest self-portraits have come from like such either trauma or just from struggles of being human, just trying to find who we are. And I think that's definitely one of the things as people we're always trying to find is who we are as people.
I think that's... Yeah, I wonder... It'd be really interesting to hear your comments. Yeah,
absolutely.
Our lovely listeners, because, you know, I honestly think that everyone's experienced kind of self-doubt.
Absolutely.
Everyone's experienced depression, I'm sure, at different points in time for whatever reason. I think for some people it's more of a prolonged struggle, and this is the people that I think often the people we're talking about have, you know, Vincent van Gogh, Salvador Dali, Frida Kahlo. I don't know if Andy Warhol also experienced that kind of turmoil. Interestingly, I don't know if Tracey Moffatt has experienced, like, I think she's more of a private person, so I don't know what her personal experience has been. And because she's a photographer, it doesn't necessarily, it's not as easy to portray, I think, turmoil. That's an interesting question. Like, in a painting, you can depict it in so many ways. How do you depict that kind of turmoil in a photograph is more about the emotion that you convey. But I think in a painting, you can really use symbolism. And
you can, yeah.
Yeah, it's different, obviously, two different media that you can really, you know, we were talking about Escher briefly before. Like Escher's, check out Escher's self-portraits, because he was so meticulous with his art, and the portraits of him, he's sort of, it's again another interesting, it's a world within the sphere. So he was creating these fantasy worlds in his art, and the way he portrays himself is within a sphere. Again, it's a mirror image, like Brett Whiteley uses he doesn't actually just a reflection in the mirror rather than, but there has been other self-portraits that Brett Whiteley has done without a mirror, and he's just depicting himself, and it was almost swirly. Again, it's a lot of turmoil, I think, happening there. Yeah, interesting. So yeah, I think, I don't know about you, but I think it doesn't matter what age I am, I'm always going to want to grow as a person.
Absolutely.
I'm always going to go through struggles. I'm going to have ups and downs, you know, and then I think this will continue until I die. I think it's something we all go through, and
absolutely. And
it's just about talking about it as well. Like we've spoken about mental health a bit in this podcast. So if you're experiencing anything like that, you know, there are hotlines that you can call, of course,
absolutely,
for help. And, you know, hopefully this hasn't triggered too many feelings in you. But, you know, that's okay too. You can talk about it, maybe reach out to us, or reach out to a friend or family, loved one.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's, you know, it is really upsetting thinking that I wish I could take away their pain. We were talking about this before. It's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
I wish I could take these artists, the pain and struggles that Frida Kahlo went through, both physically and mentally. I wish I could take away her pain. But does that mean that if she hadn't experienced that trauma, she may never have picked up a paintbrush? And what does that mean for the world as a whole? Like, what would it be without Frida Kahlo? Like, I can't imagine a world without her.
No, it is a really interesting, as you said, a double-edged sword. And, you know, like, as I said, as Nik said to viewers, like, if people need to talk about it, don't be afraid. Like, I will leave links to some really good hotlines to, you know, talk to Beyond Blue and all that sort of thing. Because, you know, at the end of the day, we're all in this together, you know. We all struggle. But, you know, at the end of the day, we need to support each other, lift each other up. And I think, as you said, like, it's really interesting because like, if it didn't happen, like, would have she picked up a pencil? Like, same with Salvador Dali, if he hadn't
experienced that, what he did as a child with his parents, which is such a strange experience. But then we wouldn't be the masterful art that is Salvador Dali. Maybe we wouldn't have had that art
exactly
to, like, you know, learn from as well as admire.
Yeah, that's it. And I think, like, if you guys have any, to our listeners, if you have any artists that we could look into ourselves, we'd always love to hear about from our listeners of what your thoughts are on the topics, you know, and
give us some feedback, please, and, you know, share, have a discussion with us, because this is kind of the idea of Jayden and I having these conversations is so that we can create a forum for other people to kind of want to have these sorts of talk discussions with us, maybe. Or with your friends, you know, if you're listening to this, maybe have a discussion with a friend, or reach out to us, because we'd really love to hear from you.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think, Jenny, Hysteric Art Theory, actually said this in the podcast, the last podcast we did. She said that once we stop talking about it, the conversation ends, you know, and it's like, and then art, like, and now I've been actually bringing that to the creator's process. I've been talking about that because it's so true. Because it's like, when you stop the conversation, it stops right there.
Yeah, and it ceases anything, because I know what Jenny was talking about too was about sharing our methods of how we create art.
Exactly,
and that's really important, to have those conversations and to talk about how art, I have so many conversations about art. Being fortunate in Melbourne with such a great art community that we're all part of, I never tire talking about art, and I think it's something we can learn from each other and we can also learn from our personal struggles. And like you said, I really love what you're saying, Jayden, about lifting each other up, because that's what art is about to me. It's not just about the aesthetics of it, it's about expressing the human condition and also supporting each other, and also saying you're not alone. Like by Salvador Dali depicting his trauma and pain, by Frida Kahlo doing the same, and many artists, Vincent van Gogh and many other artists, they're actually expressing to others that we're not alone in this struggle. Like, you're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're all in this together at the end of the day. I think it's absolutely amazing. But once again, like, I think we'll end it right there. Like, I think that's a good place to end off. As we said, thank you so much to all of our listeners, wherever you are in the world right now. Like, if you're listening in a different country, well, thank you so much. Like, we're very flattered to have you. And if you want to keep following us, have any questions, you, as Nik said, don't be afraid to ask, and subscribe to our channel, because to get notified when we release a video and when we release a podcast. We've been trying to do it on a fortnightly basis on Thursday at 9 a.m. That's when we've been releasing videos. Nik, do you have anything else you want to say before we end?
I just want to say thank you, Jayden, for this awesome conversation, but also
absolutely.
And thank you, listeners, I hope you're safe wherever you are in the world, and I'm really flattered that you've listened to this podcast. Thank you, and I hope you've got something interesting out of it. So yeah,
absolutely. And it's been my pleasure, and thank you. Like, as I said, it's been great that I get to share this journey with you. I'm so glad that we can do this together.
Yeah, me too.
It's really awesome. And thank you so much to our listeners, and we will see you in the next episode.
Yeah, thank you. Next time.